All right, let's go.
In 1957, humanity launched its first satellite, Sputnik, a metal ball beeping in orbit. 2 years later, we were already trying to reach the moon. This is the complete history of every attempt, the successes, the failures, the disasters, the moments that changed everything, from 1959 to right now in 2026.
Era 1. The space race begins. 1959 to 1966. 2 superpowers, 1 target. The United States and the Soviet Union did not go to the moon because they loved science. They went because losing was not an option. The Soviets moved first. On January 2, 1959, Luna 1 launched. It was supposed to hit the moon. It missed, flew past at 5,900 kilometers and drifted into solar orbit. But it became the first spacecraft in history to escape Earth's gravity, a partial success. 8 months later, Luna 2 did not miss. On September 14, 1959, it slammed into the lunar surface near the Sea of Serenity, the first human-made object to reach another world. No soft landing, no instruments surviving, just a deliberate impact at full speed. A point scored. Then Luna 3, October 1959. It looped around the moon and sent back the first photographs ever taken of the lunar far side. Grainy, low resolution, but humanity saw the other side of the moon for the first time in history. What it showed was unexpected. Far fewer dark plains, more craters, more rugged, completely different from what we always see from Earth. The Americans were struggling. The Pioneer and Ranger programs attempted lunar missions throughout the late 1950s and early 1960s. 6 consecutive Ranger failures, rockets exploding, spacecraft missing the moon entirely, one crashing on the wrong side. NASA's early lunar program was an embarrassment. Then Ranger 7, July 1964. It worked. It transmitted 4,316 close-up photographs of the lunar surface during its final 17 minutes of flight before crashing into the sea of clouds. Rangers 8 and 9 followed. The close-up photographs revealed a surface covered in craters all the way down to the smallest scale. And something crucial, the surface appeared solid, not the deep layer of dust some scientists had feared. Human feet might be able to stand on it. Era 2. Learning to land. 1966, the year everything changed. 1966 was the pivotal year before Apollo. Both superpowers achieved things that had never been done before in the same 12-month window. February 3, 1966, Luna 9. The Soviet Union achieved the first ever controlled soft landing on the moon. It bounced and rolled to a stop on the ocean of storms. Then it opened 4 petal-like panels, stabilized itself, and began transmitting. Close-up photographs of the lunar surface taken from ground level. The surface was solid. A human being could stand on it. The first photographs from the surface of another world. Luna 10 followed 2 months later, the first spacecraft to successfully orbit the moon. 2 more firsts in 1 year for the Soviet program. The Americans answered with Surveyor 1, June 2, 1966, first American soft landing. It touched down in Oceanus Procellarum and transmitted 11,000 photographs. Between 1966 and 1968, 5 Surveyor missions succeeded. They confirmed landing sites were safe. They tested the soil. They prepared the ground, literally, for humans. NASA also flew 5 lunar orbiter missions between 1966 and 1967. Their purpose was photography, mapping the entire near side of the moon at high resolution, identifying safe landing sites for Apollo. These missions were quiet and unglamorous. They were essential. Without them, Apollo could not have known where to land. Era 3. Apollo. 1968 to 1972. The greatest achievement in the history of exploration. On January 27, 1967, 3 astronauts died. Gus Grissom, Ed White, Roger Chaffee. A fire during a launch rehearsal inside the Apollo 1 capsule. Pure oxygen atmosphere. The fire spread in seconds. The hatch could not be opened fast enough. All three were gone before anyone could reach them. The Apollo program shut down for 18 months. A complete capsule redesign. A culture of meticulous safety review built from the ground up. Then, Apollo 8, December 21st, 1968. The first crewed spacecraft to leave Earth orbit entirely. Frank Borman, Jim Lovell, and William Anders flew to the moon and orbited it 10 times. On Christmas Eve, they broadcast a reading from Genesis to an estimated 1 billion people worldwide. Anders photographed the Earth rising above the lunar horizon. Earthrise, one of the most iconic photographs ever taken. A pale blue marble above a gray, dead landscape. It changed how humanity saw itself. Apollo 9, March 1969. First test of the lunar module in Earth orbit. The spider-like lander that would carry humans to the surface. Apollo 10, May 1969. The full dress rehearsal. Astronauts flew to the moon, descended to within 15 kilometers of the surface in the lunar module, then fired the ascent engine and returned to the command module. Everything except the landing itself. The stage was set. July 16, 1969, Apollo 11 launched. July 20, 1969, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin landed the Eagle in the Sea of Tranquility. Armstrong stepped onto the surface at 2:56 UTC on July 21st. 600 million people watched on television, the most watched live broadcast in history to that point. They were there for 21 hours and 36 minutes. They planted a flag. They collected 21.5 kilograms of lunar samples. They deployed a seismometer and a retroreflector. They called President Nixon. Then they came home. Apollo 12, November 1969. Pete Conrad and Peen Bean landed with pinpoint precision 180 meters from the Surveyor 3 probe that had been sitting on the surface since 1967. They walked over and retrieved parts of it, brought them back to Earth for material scientists to study after nearly 3 years of exposure on the lunar surface. Then, April 1970, Apollo 13. 56 hours after launch, an oxygen tank in the service module exploded. The command module lost power, lost oxygen, lost heat. The 3 astronauts, Lovell, Swigert, and Hayes, moved into the lunar module, used it as a lifeboat, looped around the moon on a free return trajectory, endured temperatures near freezing, returned to Earth 4 days later, safe. No landing, but everyone came home. It became the greatest rescue in spaceflight history. Apollo 14, February 1971. Alan Shepard, the first American in space, now 47 years old, walked on the moon. He hit 2 golf balls with a makeshift club he had smuggled on board. First golf played on another world. Apollo 15, July 1971. The first mission with the Lunar Roving Vehicle, a battery-powered buggy that let astronauts drive across the surface. David Scott and Ivan Irwin covered 27.9 kilometers, explored Hadley Riley, a long winding canyon carved by ancient lava flows, collected the Genesis rock, a piece of the original lunar crust, 4.5 billion years old. Apollo 16, April 1972, the Highlands. John Young and Charles Duke explored a region never visited before, collected the heaviest sample of any mission, deployed the first ultraviolet telescope on the moon. Apollo 17, December 1972, the last one. Gene Cernan and Jerison Schmidt, the only professional geologists to walk on the moon, spent 3 days on the surface, explored the Taurus-Littrow Valley, collected 110 kilograms of samples, the most of any mission. Schmidt discovered bright orange soil, volcanic glass beads from fire fountain eruptions billions of years ago. On December 14, 1972, at 5:40 UTC, Gene Cernan climbed the ladder of the lunar module back inside, the last human to stand on the moon. He has never been replaced. Era 4. The Soviet robots, 1970 to 1976, competing without astronauts. While Apollo was landing humans on the moon, the Soviet Union quietly achieved things of their own that are rarely discussed. They never landed cosmonauts. Their crewed lunar program, based on the massive N-1 rocket, was catastrophic. All 4 N-1 test launches exploded. The second, on July 3, 1969, produced one of the largest non-nuclear explosions in history. 30 NK-15 engines igniting at once on the launch pad, the entire launch complex destroyed. The crewed moon program was quietly canceled. The Soviets never admitted they had been trying, but their robots succeeded. Luna 16, September 1970, first robotic sample return from another world. An unmanned spacecraft landed, drilled into the surface, collected 101 grams of lunar soil, and returned it to Earth automatically. No astronauts required. Luna 17, November 1970, delivered Lunokhod-1, the first successful rover on another world, a washing machine-sized vehicle on 8 wheels controlled by a team of drivers in the Soviet Union. It operated for 322 Earth days, covered nearly 10 kilometers, far more than any Apollo astronaut drove on a single mission. Luna 24, August 1976, the last Soviet lunar mission, returned 170 grams of core samples drilled from a depth of 2 meters. Then, nothing. From 1976 to 1990, no spacecraft of any kind visited the moon. The space race was over. Nobody went back. Era 5. The Return of Interest, 1990 to 2009. New nations, new goals. The 18-year silence ended with Japan. Hiten launched in 1990. Japan became the 3rd country to reach the moon, a flyby and orbiter mission that proved Japanese deep space capability. Europe followed, Smart 1 in 2003, the first European moon mission. It tested an ion propulsion system, a far more fuel-efficient engine than chemical rockets, on a real deep space journey. It took 14 months to spiral out to the moon instead of days, a technology demonstration that would influence future missions across the solar system. Then India, Chandrayaan-1, October 2008, India's first lunar mission, an orbiter carrying 11 scientific instruments, including the Moon Mineralogy Mapper from NASA. It confirmed for the first time that water molecules exist across the lunar surface, not just at the poles, everywhere, deposited continuously by solar wind. A discovery that changed the entire model of the moon as a dry, dead world. China, Chang'e-1, October 2007, China's first mission beyond Earth orbit, a lunar orbiter. It mapped the surface in detail, created a 3D topographic map, measured the depth of the lunar soil, then deliberately crashed into the surface at mission's end. 2009, NASA launched 2 missions on the same rocket, LRO and LCROS. LRO, the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, has been mapping the moon continuously since 2009. High-resolution imagery of the entire surface, temperature measurements, topographic data. It is still operating today in 2026, one of the most productive planetary science missions ever flown. LCROS, the Lunar Crater Observation and Sensing Satellite, deliberately crossed a 2,300-kilogram rocket booster to Cabeus Crater at the South Pole, then flew through the debris plume before itself crashing. The instruments confirmed it directly. Water ice, hydrogen, ammonia, methane, silver. Permanently shadowed craters at the South Pole contain hundreds of millions of tons of ancient water ice. Era 6. China's Rise, 2013 to 2024. The New Space Power. After Luna 24 in 1976, no spacecraft had successfully soft-landed on the moon for 37 years. China ended that silence. Chang'e 3, December 14, 2013. The first soft landing since 1976. Touched down in Mare Imbrium and deployed the U-2 rover. China became the third nation in history to soft land on the moon. U-2 operated for 31 months, far longer than planned, despite a mobility failure that stopped it driving after 6 weeks. Its instruments kept working. Chang'e F4, January 3, 2019, the most ambitious landing in lunar exploration history. The far side of the moon, never visited, never landed on, permanently facing away from Earth, requiring a relay satellite to maintain any communications at all. China had launched the Qichao relay satellite to the Earth-Moon L2 Lagrange point specifically for this mission. Chang'e 4 landed in the von Karman crater inside the South Pole Aitken Basin, the largest impact crater in the solar system. 2,500 kilometers across, 8 kilometers deep. The U-22 rover has been operating ever since, still operational in 2026, the longest-running lunar rover in history. Chang'e 6, May 2024, first ever sample return from the far side, landed in the Apollo Basin inside the South Pole Aitken Basin, collected 1,935 grams of material from the deepest and oldest impact structure on the moon. The samples were returned to Earth in June 2024. Analysis published in Nature in 2025 revealed a volcanic and magnetic history on the far side completely different from the near side, turning decades of established lunar science on its head. Era 7. New players and new failures. 2019 to 2024. The moon gets complicated. The race to the moon in the 21st century has not been smooth. Israel, Bereshit, April 2019. The first private spacecraft to attempt a lunar landing, built by SpaceIL with commercial funding. It entered lunar orbit successfully. Then, a sensor malfunction during descent cut the engine. It crashed into the surface at high speed. Israel came close, became the first private attempt. India, Chandrayaan-2, September 2019. An orbiter and a lander called Vikram. The lander lost communication with mission control during its final descent. It crashed. A software error in the navigation system caused it to break too late. The orbiter survived and continues operating today, mapping the surface in fine detail. Russia, Luna 25, August 2023. Russia's first lunar mission in 47 years, its first since the Soviet Luna 24 in 1976. It crashed into the moon. A thruster malfunction during pre-landing orbital adjustments sent it into an uncontrolled descent. The mission that was supposed to demonstrate Russia's return to relevance in lunar exploration ended in a crater. Japan, iSpace Hakuto R, April 2023. Japan's first private lunar lander entered lunar orbit after a long low-energy transfer orbit, crashed during landing. A navigation error caused it to believe it was on flat ground when it was actually still 5 kilometers above the surface. It fell vertically and was destroyed. India answered its 2019 failure directly. Chandrayaan-3, August 23, 2023. The Vikram lander and Pragyan rover touched down near the South Pole, the first spacecraft ever to land at the South Pole. India became the fourth nation to achieve a soft landing on the moon. The Pragyan rover confirmed sulfur, oxygen, iron, calcium, and titanium on the surface. India became the first nation to reach the South Pole region. Era 8, Commercial Moon, 2024 to 2026. Private companies join the race. NASA's Commercial Lunar Payload Services (CLPS) program contracted private companies to deliver science payloads to the moon, not building the spacecraft itself, just paying for delivery. The first attempt failed badly. Astrobotics Peregrine Mission 1, January 2024. A propellant leak immediately after launch. The spacecraft never reached the moon, intentionally deorbited to burn up in Earth's atmosphere. Then, Intuitive Machines IM-1 Odysseus, February 22, 2024. It landed near the South Pole at Malaparte A crater, the first American spacecraft to soft land on the moon in 52 years, since Apollo 17 in 1972. but it landed tilted on its side. A sensor had been switched off before launch. The landing radar used laser rangefinders that were not activated. Ground controllers improvised using a NASA LiDAR experiment on board as a substitute. It worked. Odysseus landed, slightly sideways, still transmitted, the first commercial moon landing in history. Firefly Aerospace's Blue Ghost, March 2025, 10 NASA payloads, landed near Mare Crisium on the moon's eastern near side, operated for a full lunar day, approximately 14 Earth days. The first fully successful commercial lunar landing, returned data on radiation, electromagnetic environments, regolith properties, and navigation systems, everything it was sent to do. Japan's SLIM, January 2024, smart lander for investigating moon, landed within 55 meters of its target point, the most precise lunar landing in history. The planned precision was 100 meters. SLIM beat it. But it came to rest on its nose, slightly tipped forward. Its solar panels were facing the wrong direction. It operated in short bursts when sunlight hit the panels at the right angle. Despite the angle problem, it returned science data. Era 9. Humans return to the moon's neighborhood. 2022 to 2026, the Artemis program. NASA's goal this time is not flags and footprints, it is permanent presence. Artemis 1, November 2022, uncrewed. The first launch of the Space Launch System, NASA's most powerful rocket since the Saturn V. An Orion capsule flew around the moon on a distant retrograde orbit, reaching 432,000 kilometers from Earth, the farthest any spacecraft designed for humans had ever traveled. Splashed down successfully in the Pacific on December 11, 2022, exactly 50 years to the day as Apollo 17 landed on the moon. Artemis 2, April 1, 2026, 4 humans flew around the moon for the first time in 52 years. Commander Reed Wiseman, Victor Glover, Christina Koch, Canadian astronaut Jeremy Hansen. They named their Orion capsule Integrity. They launched April 1. 5 days later, they flew past the moon at a distance of 6,545 kilometers, passed behind the far side and lost communication with Earth for 40 minutes, watched Earthset and Earthrise from deep space, reached a maximum distance of 406,771 kilometers from Earth, the farthest any human being has ever traveled in space, beating the Apollo 13 record that had stood since 1970. Commander Wiseman, describing what he saw behind the moon, said, "It's just indescribable. No matter how long we look at this, our brains are not processing the image in front of us." They splashed down in the Pacific off San Diego on April 10th. 10 days. Everyone came home. Artemis 3 is planned for 2027, lander testing in Earth orbit. Artemis 4 is NASA's target for the first crewed lunar landing since 1972, targeted for early 2028, at the South Pole, where the water ice is. China's crewed lunar program targets the moon by 2030. Every mission, from a metal ball that missed the moon in 1959 to a robot driving across the far side in a crater nobody had ever seen up close, from 3 astronauts dying in a fire on the launch pad to 12 human beings walking on another world. From 37 years of silence after Luna 24 to a new space race with commercial companies, new nations, and permanent bases as the goal. 667 years passed between Columbus reaching the Americas in 1492 and Apollo 11 in 1969. 67 years past Apollo 11 and Artemis 2. We went, we stopped, we are going back, and this time the plan is not to leave. Subscribe to Cosmic Hives. See you in the next one.